Welcome to Unlearn, where we talk to industry leaders about unlearning how we go to market.
I'm Kelly Sarabin, and I run Tech Partner Enablement and Advocacy at HubSpot.
And I'm Asher Matthew, co-founder of Partnership Leaders.
The old ways of going to market are getting more expensive and less effective.
To thrive in an era of digital transformation, you have to go to market differently. Let's find out how. Hey everybody, we're back for another episode of Unlearn. You know what I realized this morning, Kelly? Is if you put chocolate in coffee, it tastes better. Yeah.
Thanks for your hot tip.
Exactly.
It'll help you sell better, I'm sure.
That's true. I'll market better, you know? I'm not just a
Forget
seller.
AI. You don't need to go that fancy.
But it definitely makes your coffee taste great. Yeah. All right. So we have another guest today. Peter, do you want to introduce yourself and then we'll kick the podcast off?
Sure. Hi, my name is Peter Evans, and I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at McFadyen Digital, which specializes in providing strategy assessments and implementations to marketplaces all over the world.
Oh, that's great. The thing that I love about the Unlearn podcast is we don't know what guest is going to show up, and we don't know what topic we're going to discuss. So it's new for everything. So it's just like all of us meeting at a Starbucks, you know?
Sounds good.
And
a very nerdy based, Starbucks.
Sorry, are you saying Tim Hortons because you like Tim Hortons? Is that what I heard? So, Peter, where are you based?
I live in Denver now.
Oh,
just
great.
Moved here a year ago, and getting acclimated and learning what it's like to live out west.
And do you want to tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got to McFadden?
Yeah, sure. So, wow, it's a long journey, but I've got spent years in academia. I did my master's and PhD at MIT, and really focused on international things. I lived in Japan for 4 years.
Wow.
And so I know a bit about Asia. And then after I finished my PhD, I got picked up by General Electric to lead strategy for their energy business. And that was big because it's a big business, oil, gas, and power. So know a bit about the industrial space, but there was this thing about what they call Internet of Things kicking around at the time.
Yeah.
And so I ended up working a lot on that and wrote the white paper that announced GE's effort to become a digital industrial enterprise. So that was sort of my first introduction to this. And this is over a decade ago now. And then I got very interested in platforms. They just struck me as a powerful business model.
Yep.
And you saw them a lot in the consumer space. So it was interesting to see where they could or couldn't emerge in the industrial space. So looked at that. Ended up also working at KPMG in the innovation group for a number of years. Wow. And then joined McFadden more recently because it just fits. You know, they specialize in marketplaces as more of a boutique, but they have deep domain expertise in this topic. So I learn a lot from the technology folks about how you do implementations and how you connect, these software packages like Miracle, which is a big provider of software in this space to large marketplaces, to Magento, how you integrate Miracle with, commerce tools and things of that nature. Anyway, so I appreciate that, but I'm through and through a strategy person. So I excel more on the strategy side.
This is great. And just so that our audience understands, because the word strategy is used a lot of different ways, right? Like my definition is like strategy is where you ethically find hidden opportunities for growth, right? But when you say, what does your role entail?
Sure. So companies often, I guess to step back, just like in cloud, there are a lot of cloud providers. So, and it's a big expense and it's a big adjustment for a company to go to the cloud. And so there are companies out there that do the business and tech assessment to match the business goals with the technology objectives. And so we do the same for marketplaces to help a company that's trying to launch or thinking about launching a marketplace, understanding their business objectives, and then translating that into technology recommendations. Now, this can happen with a company that's just looking to build one marketplace. What becomes really interesting is when you work with very large companies like Fortune 500 companies, and they have multiple
Yeah.
marketplace opportunities. And
Yeah.
so I've come to call that marketplace grand strategy. So
That's,
thinking about it from both their multiple business units,
yeah.
how these would integrate, how you put together a coherent technology strategy that aligns with those business opportunities, not just in one country or region, but potentially globally. And so I've been working actually with several very large companies on their marketplace grand strategies.
This is great. We're going to ask you a question about like what's top of mind for you. But in the last week, somebody just asked me this question and said, "Hey, you know what? I'll go buy something from a marketplace, but I'm still expecting it to be implemented. It's like, who's actually going to implement that for me?" And it didn't click to me until that person said that, because like when most of us think about marketplaces, they're like, oh, iTunes App Store or like HubSpot App Store, right? Like I just click and it's play, right? But if you want to buy an enterprise grade app from a marketplace and push it into an enterprise company, like there is the last mile delivery of this thing, right? And so that was a very interesting question, and I'd love to dive deeper on that. Or maybe we can start there, or maybe you give us a little bit of primer on like what the state of marketplaces is at where you are at. So whichever way you want to go.
Well, what's super cool is how diverse they are.
Yeah,
So one little platform that's interesting out of San Francisco is called Curated, and what they do is not only do they sell products like skis and climbing gear and things of that nature, they will hook you up with a coach because some of these endeavors or hobbies or pursuits are complicated, and the equipment to
yeah,
do that thing is actually pretty expensive, and it's a big investment. And so they've layered in this coaching opportunity in addition. So they match you with a coach who has expertise in that area, and they help you walk through. Hey, if you're going to be a biker and you want a really high end bike, here are your options, and hey, what are you really doing? So,
oh,
um,
that's
so
great.
that's one kind of really interesting one. There's platforms for dog walking. There's a platform called Rover, and it matches people who have dogs with people who walk dogs.
Yeah, yeah, I'm
And
familiar
they've
with
done,
Rover. Yes, yeah,
yeah. So that's another example of a platform. But we're also seeing them in industrial. So there are platforms in the medical space that specialize in medical. There are platforms that match nurses to hospitals.
yeah,
So this we're actually have evolved in over the last the last decade or so into what you might call a platform economy, and they touch many aspects of our lives, from social media to how we buy things online to how businesses buy things online. So
yeah.
it's a huge space, and literally trillions of dollars now are transacted through platforms.
Yeah, I would just say
I'd
the
be curious.
sorry, Kelly. I was just
I
going to make a comment on like, if you have a pet dog, Rover is actually a very cool name for a pet dog. Like, and that's what my first pet dog was. Name was Rover. He was like a mix of a German Shepherd and a Rottweiler, and like this dog was like amazingly like strong and buff, and we called him Rover, and it was so cool. And then when this company Rover came up, I'm like, that's how I found it, because I was looking for Rover, and then the name of the company came up. I guess before Kelly asks a question, because Kelly's going to ask a very intelligent question, I'm going to ask a not so intelligent question, right? Like,
Asher wants to talk more about dogs
well, Rover is like a great name for a dog,
and chocolate.
Exactly. It's a Friday. Um, but how did we get to a place where buying B2B software or B2B applications from a marketplace became a thing? Like, do you have any
Well,
guidance on that?
the early marketplaces like eBay and Amazon, they built their own technology,
Yeah.
but so many businesses wanted them, and it's not their core expertise. Why build this complex software if you're just going to use it for your application?
Yeah.
And so there's a group of companies out there now that specializes in providing marketplace software. And so it's complicated. It's different from e-commerce. So e-commerce is one company selling their products and services, and putting up a web page, and that has become increasingly commoditized with companies
Yeah.
like Wix, right? You can build websites
Anything, or
pretty easily
card
in
for
low code.
that matter.
no code. You
Much
can,
simpler from a technical perspective than a
yeah,
marketplace that requires
yeah,
having third parties supplying goods or
yeah.
services.
So, but the really big ones. So, for example, Macy's. I don't know if you saw, but Macy's has moved to a marketplace model. So, when they have stood up an e-commerce capability where they bring on other brands that they sell through their marketplace, and they have about 200 now, and they're aiming to grow to 6,000. So, and that's complex software because they have to manage the catalogs of
Yep.
multiple brands,
Yep.
and they need to do the checkout, the fraud detection. There's a ton of stuff that happens behind the scenes to make these marketplaces work efficiently and effectively.
Should we
And
ask the question
I
or
want to
like
circle
what?
back to the other question about what Asher had originally asked around this idea of when you sell to businesses, right? When you're no longer selling consumer products and you have these more complex. Now it could be something more industrial, or it could be, as I think Asher was referring to, like enterprise SaaS products and unique services. What we see in SaaS is usually there's two marketplaces, right? There's a services marketplace and a SaaS marketplace. But I think this might tie into what you're saying about having a grand strategy across your company. Because from the business purchase viewpoint, right, what Asher was saying is ideal. I want to buy this complicated, like I want to buy NetSuite, but I want someone who can implement this for me in my organization, handle all the integrations. It'd be ideal not to have to go to one marketplace and then go to another marketplace and really vet that out separately. But market wide, we do see that more. Curious what your thoughts on what the best strategy is for those situations, and also what you're seeing in the market. Are you seeing more companies unify those two things together when they're selling to other businesses?
Well, it depends what they're selling, right? But what we are seeing is that the experience is built up, and so you're now able to do much more complex transactions through marketplaces, right? In the past, in the early days, it was a fixed good with a fixed price, and you put it on the website, and the buyer and the seller understood what it was, and the platform provided the infrastructure to make that transaction happen. But for more complex things, like where you need long term negotiations, or prices aren't really clear, and you need the two parties to get together and perhaps put together proposals, or they don't know what the expertise is in advance, and so they need to build a team. So there are platforms now that provide surge capacity or specialty marketing capabilities. So they'll actually match a company that wants to run a marketing campaign with their sort of assembled, aggregated group of boutique companies or individual freelancers that provide those marketing capabilities. And when you're dealing with a big company that wants to run a campaign like a Coke or a Pepsi, they're running a 200,000 to a 1.2 or maybe even a $3 million campaign. They just one freelancer isn't going to cut it, right? You need to assemble a whole team. And so the marketplaces are getting more sophisticated now so that they can handle those more complex transactions. And that's happening. And so what that's enabling is that firms now can lean into the platform economy to get more and more of the services that they need. Some of them may be SaaS software services, but in many cases, it requires a combination of technical expertise, some kind of goods like logistics services, or software. And in the past, you would have the big integrated consulting firm. I mean, that's what Accenture does. But pieces of what Accenture does can now be found through marketplaces.
All right, so Peter, like, so what happens now when these large companies who all were like depending on like seven different types of assessments, and then they would give you an SOW that will like stretch like 7 years long, right? And so now, like, and also one big part of those SOWs was companies really wanted to see who's working on their projects, and they would require to show who leads the project, who's like working on the technical side, who's working on the business side, their credentials, like like these SOWs are like very detailed, right? So what happens
Yeah.
now in this market
So,
world?
well, there are areas where marketplaces still have a hard time, and I would put that in that category, which is when things get really complicated and you need these highly detailed negotiated contracting. Then the value proposition of putting it on a marketplace sort of dissipates,
Okay.
right? Um, so you have that issue. So to be realistic, you're not going to see a marketplace in every single facet of business life, right? But they are very powerful, and they're automation machines, right? They allow you to automate things that otherwise would have done manually. And so, the industrial space has been slower to adopt marketplace models, but the software is getting better, and the advantages of channeling your relationships through marketplaces is pretty strong. And so we're seeing more and more movement in that area.
Okay. And the so I guess let's talk a little bit about just the components of a modern marketplace, right? Because like we've gone through all this stuff, right? And I hear terms like private offers and like private offers, like there's what are the components of a modern marketplace, right? Just so that our audience can like really understand, because these questions around marketplaces keep coming up. And so it'd be good to just get an idea of like what are the components of a modern marketplace.
Well, fundamentally, what do? They connect people who want to buy things with people who want to sell things, but you can also add other features. So, one way to think about it is a shallow marketplace versus a deep marketplace.
Okay.
So, a shallow marketplace would be just focus on getting the transactions done, right? And so they optimize that. However, we found, or companies have found, that they can make more money and attract more users, which creates more value, which attracts more users, right? So you get those network effects going if you add more services to them. So the big platforms like Amazon and Alibaba have added advertising to their platform, right? YouTube as well, right? It's not just uploading your
Yeah.
your stuff. They've added this whole layer of advertising to the platform, and that's attractive to the producers of the content because that allows them to monetize. And it's also useful for the advertisers because they're looking for eyeballs.
Yep.
And so we call these multi-sided platforms or marketplaces. And so over time, you move from shallow marketplaces to more deep or complex with a whole range of services.
Yep.
Another example is Airbnb. When they first launched, they had a hard time getting people to offer their apartments for lease. And that's because there was a risk. And so what Airbnb did is they came in with an insurance policy. So that's layering in a set of services. So really interesting to see the evolution of all of these services now that become embedded. And so what does Shopify do?
Yeah.
Shopify offers merchants these websites. It's more of an e-commerce than a full-fledged marketplace,
Yeah.
but the idea is the same, where now Shopify is offering a whole series of services. Now, if we go into the AI space, which is really interesting,
Yep.
is something like ChatGPT is now opening up to allow for plugins, right? And so now you've got this whole ecosystem of companies that want to plug in to the ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is on the path to become a very large company if it keeps its open policy of allowing third parties to connect into its large language model, right? And there's tremendous. In fact, I just saw an announcement. The CEO of edX, which is a big consortium of education, they've just announced a ChatGPT plugin. So one of the things that's going to happen is that these marketplaces that already exist are going to want to supercharge their marketplaces, right, with AI.
Yeah.
And so you hear a lot of concern about the effects of AI, but I tell you, they're doubling down in figuring out clever ways to use this technology because it enhances their services, it automates things, and it reduces staff. Right, you can cut out people that were like writing content for the the website and explaining products. You can get ChatGPT to do that. So powerful content generation engines are now going to be added to these marketplaces.
Yeah.
Do you see that in the near horizon being added as a way to surface in large marketplaces the ideal fit for the buyer? right? Like one of the challenges with marketplaces as a buyer is finding the right goods or
Yeah.
services, right, that you're looking for, and that's a perennial challenge once you get any decent sized marketplace. So do you see that being layered in as a tool that can
Well,
make
there's
better
two components.
recommendations
Yeah,
and
there's
more
two components.
personalized and customized, right? Because a lot of marketplaces you go and it may look the same to everyone, but layer that in, you can have a
Yeah, so
customized.
there's two components to that. One is supercharging your discovery engines, and those discovery engines have become very, very powerful.
Yeah.
And they're now not just visual, text, but they can be voice activated. So we're going to see continued innovation and deployments of new features and capabilities around search engines. The other trend is towards more curated marketplaces where the marketplace itself, I mean, that's part of its function, is to ensure that the best brands, the best quality, or whatever other characteristics and features that they're providing, and that's the duty. And they hire staff that are specialized in that, and that's what their tasks are, so that the buyer or the user of the platform gets a lot of that filtering done for them, right? So we're seeing these specialty marketplaces emerge, even in apparel, right? There are a number of them, like Farfetched and things, that they champion that they're not just a bazaar of anybody who wanted to sell anything. They're much more of a curated
Yep.
experience,
Yep. And
and they create communities associated with them. So when I talked about shallow versus deep, a whole nother dimension of creating a deeper marketplace is to really cultivate a community. So a company like ThreadUp or Poshmark, they are moving into this circular economy world, but they're also doing it by building community and making it feel good to be a part of that marketplace, right? And so it's not just doing commercial transactions. It's about your lifestyle and the people you want to hang out with and the values that you want to be a part of and learn about.
that is a
Have you
very
seen that
interesting point.
done well in the B2B context?
Well, B2B is totally different, right? B2B is all about expertise, right? And making sure that you're helping a buyer find what they really need. And so there, it's about authority, expertise, and things of that nature. Whereas on the consumer side, it's lifestyle, it's sentiment, it's values. It's slightly different. And so that actually has interesting implications for influencers. So if you're a consumer facing marketplace, more and more spend is going into things like TikTok because they have such an influence on buyers and can drive sales, right? And doing fun, quirky things and things of that nature work in that space. Whereas if you're 3M or ABB or some of these other big, you want to do, and so what they do is they sponsor training programs. Some of them even certify in career development to help the users of their products get better at using them. And so there's a whole education component. So again, when I talked about shallow versus deep, one way to create a deep platform is to build out a training and certification component that brings people into your network. Or a really cool thing that I learned about recently is a big oil company wanted to really get their product out into the market in Indonesia. And so they created a loyalty program. If you bought a regular amount of lubricants from that particular company, you would earn points that would build to buying a motorbike. So you can imagine that is a really big incentive for somebody who's a mechanic, working on cars and scooters, to be able to win a scooter of their own is a big deal. So a deeper marketplace is where you start to embed a lot of interesting loyalty programs as well.
Great. And let's dive a little bit into the fun, quirky things. The side of this thing, because that's kind of a little bit of the world we live in. And And sometimes I feel like these things can be distracting to people from actually getting their jobs done, right? So where is the state of like B2B from your perspective?
Well, if you want fun, quirky things, then we need to delve into Web3 and NFTs, and where that's going, and metaverse stuff. And they actually are all platforms. So, an interesting case is State Farm, right? State Farm actually, for years, has done deals with Live Nation. They
Yep.
sponsor concert events. Why do they do that? Because they want the next generation of buyers, right? And so, what do young kids? Their first purchase of insurance is typically car insurance. So the insurance companies want to be present at events where young people are. Now, what's interesting is State Farm has just done a deal with iHeart Music or Media and Roblox
Oh, interesting.
for a metaverse event.
Yeah.
Roblox are getting them even younger, huh?
Yeah,
Get those 30
so
They're like,
insurance.
you started walking and you can hold a controller. You need insurance for your thumb. Okay.
well, it's just being there,
Metaverse
right, and
insurance.
getting your name out and name recognition, and so there is a site. Nike has one as well. It's called Nike Land in Roblox.
Yes.
So here's a company using a platform to kind of get exposure to the next generation of consumers. So we see this a lot. And then the question is how do you use NFTs and things to create loyalty and stickiness? So VW, which has 12 brands, including Porsche,
Yep.
has been doing a lot of things in the metaverse and with NFTs to engage a new group of consumers. And again, these all are transacted on platforms.
Yeah.
And to watch and see how different brands are experimenting with this is super interesting because they haven't figured it all out. But it's a thing and it's a way to engage. The other is obviously TikTok is exploded in popularity, and you're finding more and more companies find they have to allocate ad spend to influencers and presence on these social media sites if you're looking to get in front of the next generation of buyers.
Yeah. Talk to us a little bit about just the marketplace and the community and maybe on the B2B side, right? Because in the B2B world, the explosion of communities is I mean, we all saw like many, I mean, I think there's like 100,000 communities by now, like or something like that, right?
But on B2B or B2C?
On the B2B
In the
side.
B2B, there are communities like partnership leaders. Asher runs partnership leaders, which is community for partnerships. But then you have Pavilion, which is for marketing and sales executives.
Oh, I see.
There's like pre-sales collective.
Mind the Product, which was
Yeah.
actually acquired. But yeah, there's a bunch of and they're more of the nature that you're saying, right? They're aimed at professional success. So they have an education component that's very strong,
Well,
but also a networking component, right? Like
yeah, well,
networking is a huge.
the biggest professional network out there is LinkedIn, right?
Yeah.
LinkedIn has now 750 million professionals in the world on that platform. And you're seeing it build out deeper offerings to quote unquote creators. They have creator tools now.
Yep.
What are those? If you are eligible, now you can broadcast on LinkedIn and have your own show. So the platforms kind of figure out like how do they create value and deeper connectivity and new ways for people to promote. I mean, that's one of the reasons why you join a platform is their exposure or to learn. And in fact, LinkedIn has added a whole learning component. And what you find is when people are in between jobs, they're very hungry to learn. So they're capturing those people at the right time when they're looking to upskill or they have extra time in between jobs. And so LinkedIn provides all sorts of courses. So there's professional development, and then you get into the whole education area, which is, finishing your undergraduate or your graduate program isn't the end of learning. In fact, learning continues throughout your life. So, I think the B2B companies have recognized that training, in the question then becomes, do you try to monetize that or you just offer it as a freemium product? to attract and build loyalty and community, right, for a particular group. So,
I mean,
and the platforms allow you to do that at fairly low transaction costs,
yeah,
right? In a way, previously, you'd had to have classrooms, you'd have to bring people to a particular venue, very, very expensive. Now with streaming and being able to do Zoom and all this stuff has really lowered the cost of being able to provide that. But the quality ranges dramatically from terrible to really, really good. And platforms like Masterclass have done incredibly
yeah,
well. I
masterclass
mean,
is
it's $1 billion enterprise now.
yeah, yeah, and I'll just add like they because our audience is a lot of B2B folks, right?
Okay.
And the word community comes up over and over again. And at least in my humble opinion, you can't action a community. A community is really there to provide a sense of belonging, right? But what happens inside the community is you have connections, and then that connections lead to some sort of a destination, could be personal or professional success, and then they provide resources to get you there. So that's kind of
Yeah.
what are the
Well,
variables in a community.
exactly. And in fact, there are companies now that build software just for
Yeah.
communities,
Yep.
like Mighty,
Yep.
right? And so that is a thing unto itself. And in fact, I'm involved in a community that was set up in Europe. Europe has lags actually in platform formation. It's lagged the US and China. And so there's a community called the Network. And they bring together platform professionals, people who are trying to understand how platforms operate,
Yep.
learn best practices and things of that nature. And I believe that they use Mighty as their community
Yeah,
organizing
there's
tool.
Mighty, Circle, Common Room. Like there's tons of like
Exactly.
space. There's tons of like tech that's coming into it. And my personal opinion is that if the AI movement wasn't so strong, I think the community movement would be really strong right now, because that's where
No, but you need community, and there will be communities centered around AI.
yeah,
And it's a blend, and that's what we're doing. We're moving into this blended world of digital and physical. A lot of the community is to keep people together so that until their next physical event, right?
yeah.
So
I'm so
physical
glad you
hasn't
said
gone
that.
away.
Yeah, because like what happens is there have been communities forever, right? Like for the last 50 years, because like so you go to an event, then there's like this break, then there's another event, then there's this break, and then there's another event, and the event could be virtual, it could suck, it could be really good. Like there's all these things that are right, but there isn't like an event, then there's the continuity of the connection, another event that builds on top of that continuity of connection, another event that builds on top of that and continuity of connection, right? And so like this thing is what I think the modern like community version
Yeah.
2.0 movement is all about. In a way, is like how do you keep the connections moving towards a destination, right? And again, the destination could be personal or professional success.
Yeah, well, there's a group that focuses specifically on virtual events. It's called the Virtual Event Group, VEG,
Oh,
and it's a great group. And they meet and discuss next generation technology and best practices around hosting virtual events. And in fact, I learned about a technology called Twine through participating in that group, and I used it because I co-chair the MIT Platform Strategy Summit.
yep.
And when we were doing our virtual events, it used LinkedIn to connect people who are part of our event with each other for short interactive discussions. And it was fantastic, actually, because it's a global event, and we had people connecting from India to Africa, from Africa to the US, all over the world. And it would do these short links, and it tapped into, I guess, a LinkedIn API that allowed these connections to happen. And then it would host these short interactive discussions of 2.5 minutes or so. And it's amazing how much you can share
Yeah.
just in two minutes or so.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about the
I
platform summit, because we learned about it from Jeff also, and so but I don't know if we went into little detail. Is it invitation only? Can everybody get there? Like, and what do you discuss there?
Yeah, so it's been happening now for a decade. This will be the 11th year. It takes place at the MIT Media Lab on July 13th this year. And our focus this year is on the future of platforms. Where are platforms going? Right? We've seen a tremendous growth over the last decade, but we seem to be at an inflection point in many areas. Like with social media, are the big players going to continue to be dominant, or are we going to see the rise of new platforms emerge in social media? And so that's an interesting question. There's new regulatory pressures and things coming to bear. So anyway, we're going to explore this. And then one area that I've gotten super interested in is kind of challenging this idea that platforms are really all that disruptive, because what they do is just reinforce the linear economy.
Yeah.
They do very little to actually promote reuse, recycling, and that is going to become a bigger issue. So I've started to look at the circular platforms,
Okay.
right? And so that's happening in apparel, it's happening in plastics, and in other areas. And so one of the panels we're going to focus on is circular platforms. What exists out there, and what could potentially be built that would support more sustainable practices for the world.
Can you define that term more? Yeah, what exactly does it?
Oh,
What exactly makes
so you
something a
think about
circular
a
platform?
Yeah, so you think about a typical platform. You go on there, you identify the good or service that you want, and then it's delivered, and then it's used, and then typically discarded, right? Versus having that good take back, right, and potentially resold to somebody else, or recycled or reused. And so you're
Okay.
seeing some platforms emerge that specialize in secondhand clothing, for example, like Poshmark. Um, but you're also seeing it in the B2B space with recycling of plastics. Um, and I think we're going to need them with the explosion of electric vehicles.
Yep. 100%.
Estimates are that we're going to have millions of batteries, and batteries are very big for vehicles, and they use scarce metals like lithium
Yep.
in the production. If the cars are discarded and then that lithium is dissipated, there's concerns over the availability, potentially even geopolitical conflict that could arise from competition to acquire this, or it could stall out the transition to a more sustainable future if the prices of lithium go up. So there's a lot of interest in recycling, but there doesn't exist yet a marketplace for recycled lithium batteries.
Just on the lithium topic, this is one of the reasons why Tesla's board had been pushing pressure on Elon to like really focus on like renewable, or how do you like renew lithium's uses, because this
Yeah.
lithium, I actually own stock in a company called LTHM. It's a ticker symbol, and I primarily bought it just to understand what is happening with lithium mining and stuff. It's very interesting once you dive deeper into like how does it mine,
Oh, yeah. There's
this
only a few
process.
places in the world where you can extract it
Yeah,
economically.
yeah,
In the U.S.'s deficit of mining or indigenous
yes,
supply,
yep,
so we're going to be reliant on imports.
yes,
Um, so what my perspective is that yes, you could get recycling going, but what if you actually created a marketplace
yeah.
instead of just having these kind of typical company to company transactions? You actually created a marketplace.
Yep.
It could be a more efficient way to boost recycling.
Yeah, no, totally. And then all this nearshoring and things like that. I guess we could spend an hour, and we're coming up on time. But what we do here
Sure.
is like on these podcasts, like we this is like the first one of our meetings. So we would love to have you back on the podcast to dive a little bit more into like community, marketplace, how these things come together, and if that's okay with you.
Yeah, well, we've had a pretty wide-ranging conversation.
Yeah.
Happy to dig into any one of these areas
Yeah, and I hope
more
you enjoyed it,
deeply.
because the format is very, very casual.
Yeah, no, it's fun, and appreciate all the different questions. And hopefully, it's a big space, but it is very impactful. And one of the things I've come to recognize is it's not just the gig workers that can build a career in this space, there's a professional class of what I call platform
Yes,
professionals, and they're
totally.
really interesting jobs, and they're often at the forefront of where the companies are going.
Yes.
They involve strategy,
Yep.
they involve ecosystem development and management, because platforms are all about bringing in the third parties into your ecosystem.
Yeah.
So you need somebody to manage that. There's a
Yeah.
lot of interesting and challenging engineering that goes into this. And then next week, I'm going to San Francisco to speak at the Marketplace Risk Conference.
Yeah.
There's trust and security, which is a topic we haven't talked about yet. But once you have a platform, you want to maintain it, ensure that it isn't attacked, that the users have a good experience.
Yeah. There's the
You prevent
languages.
fraud
Yeah.
and things of that nature. So there's a whole component of that. And then there's the tax issues. When marketplaces first arose, there were no tax rules that applied to them. It was one of Amazon's advantages, right, in
Yep.
the early days.
Yep.
But now the regulators have caught up, and now they're beginning to use platforms as a vehicle to achieve their revenue targets.
Yes.
So they're actually formulating tax policy specifically for platforms.
Yeah. And
So here's one
That's
for you.
interesting.
Here's one for you that's really interesting. I just learned about because I'm on a panel with Avalara, which is a big tax provider to marketplaces. So they told me that there's concern about decreasing revenue from gasoline, because as gasoline sales decline, that's where most of the money is generated to pay for roads.
Yep.
And a lot of people are not driving as much to the malls and things, right?
Yep.
So they're not using as much gasoline. So states and the federal government have gotten concerned about where that revenue is going to come from to pay for. So then now they're starting to think about putting some sort of tax
Yep.
on last mile delivery.
Yep. Yep.
So
And
the
so
platforms now will have to pay for some of that, and that'll get embedded in the cost of securing your goods that you buy through e-commerce sites.
yeah, just for our listeners, there's actually three types of taxes. There's sales tax, use tax, and excise tax. And the gasoline taxes are all levied through excise, and they're like at the point of transaction, not the point of delivery. Just a quick fun fact for you, Pete. I was at Avalara. I was employee number 70 or 80 at
Oh,
Avalara, and
wow.
I was there for 7.5 years.
Okay.
I actually saw this whole thing take place. But I
Oh,
know we're coming up
wow.
on
That's
time.
fantastic.
We would love to have you back because there's a big burning question about like who should the owner of a marketplace be, because like in a B2B world, like even maybe in a B2C world, right, when a board says hey, or the executive says hey, let's go move in this direction, they need an owner, because if there's no owner, this is not getting done well, which I think has also happened
Well,
in the past.
well, some companies spin off their marketplaces and
Yeah.
create a what they call a new co, which is a completely new entity or organization.
Yeah.
Others have tried to do it by rebranding and creating a separate brand, but
Yep.
still owning and operating it.
Yep.
And others have tried to launch them under their existing brand. So there's a whole nother conversation
Yeah,
we
totally.
could
That's
have
what I was
around
saying. So
brand
that's one
Yeah,
strategy.
the
conversation.
branding question is really interesting. And the
Yeah.
branding, as you're mentioning, for the suppliers and losing the customer relationship, how that impacts your brand as the supplier is very interesting.
So for our
Right.
listeners,
So
And
next
then the
time.
other one is the big manufacturers, sell through distributors. And so they don't have fulfillment capability. So then the question becomes, how do they address fulfillment if they want to move to a marketplace model?
yeah. Yeah, totally. So for our listeners, we're going to talk a little bit about who's the owner of a marketplace, and this, and then maybe like some governance things as well, because this is a very important topic. And then platforms as a whole as a driver of indirect growth, because there is a platform leader, or as at least I would call him, because like I'm leading the movement on partnership leaders, right, myself. There's we need to push the partnership leaders further so that they can actually start thinking holistically about indirect growth. And there's other types of indirect growth that are not really in the partnership leaders like purview today. So I don't. This always happens. This is, I think, the third time this has happened now, where we get into a conversation. We're like, we could have this for hours, right? But Pete, we're gonna bring you back on,
Okay.
and we'll talk about this. But thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Yeah, no, it was fun, a lot of fun, and appreciate all the questions. And obviously, it's just a rich and dynamic space. So let's do it again.
Thank you for listening to Unlearn. Subscribe wherever you listen and visit unlearnpodcast.com for the transcripts.